want to talk a little bit about great successful companies, products, and what we have learned on this journey to get there. This, I think, is very impressive. We have to learn how to use the opportunities we have, the learning.
A miscommunication, again, can be absolutely just hundreds of thousands of dollars up in smoke. Some of the best people I've worked with are also the most efficient communicators.
It's about learning together.
Absolutely.
To understand what mental model they have in mind. Is it maybe more productive than what I do already? Hey everybody, it's Sascha from Potenzial, and today I'm here with Sascha from Tabulous. We want to talk a little bit about how to create successful companies, products, and what we have learned on this journey to get there. You want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. So I'm Russ. I got a doctorate from UC Berkeley in bioengineering, and I took that knowledge to work in biopharmaceuticals. So I did a startup for a number of years called Novome, where we developed microbiome therapies and made it into clinical trials. And now we're making laboratory software out of some stuff we built internally at Novome. So that's called Tabulous, and we hope it helps further scientists.
I'm pretty sure it will help. It sounds pretty interesting. If I remember correctly, you were saying that you use like AI to transform the data you collect in...
Yes, in the software, yes.
In the software, so that people can easier and faster review it, understand it, and build a whole picture from it.
Absolutely. So, we found that there were a lot of shortcomings in the existing software market for scientists, something called laboratory information management systems. And so essentially scientists, despite doing cutting-edge research, have to store all of their information in these really outdated tools, and especially they don't leverage AI in order to kind of analyze your data faster, get new fresh insights from the same data. So we kind of rebuilt the tool from the ground up and made it a lot easier to use. So we just kind of fixed all of the problems that we we found frustrating as we were doing research ourselves.
And exactly this I find very inspiring. You have a problem, you see the problem, and like Sascha was saying, find a solution to it to fix it.
Exactly.
And I find it very inspiring too with bioengineering, because it's a little bit different to other companies and other products. Since you, if I understand correctly, you have one product you work on. You have to in theory that it works. You work on it for years, you get investors, you make sure that, everything is making sense. But then eventually you have to test it in clinical trials, and it might look differently afterwards.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me a little bit more about this experience?
So people talk about startups as being maybe a one miracle or two miracle startup. That is, like, you need a miracle in order for something to work. And maybe the miracle, for instance, in Uber, the miracle was that people would let strangers into their cars and drive them around. And it worked. They managed to establish a sort of trust that allowed them to build a massive taxi network. In the case of bioengineering, there are many miracles in a single company, which makes it, it really makes it quite a trial. Because first there's the miracle of just getting the bioengineering to work in test tube, and then you also have to establish things like safety profiles, and then finally for us, we brought it all the way into clinical trials, which is where you finally find out how it looks. First in healthy people, and then eventually in patients. So for treatments, if you fail clinical trials, it can just be not because the drug was harmful or anything like that, but simply because the drug didn't work even if it worked a little bit, if it didn't work as well as you hoped, then it may not be worthwhile going forward. So that's ultimately what we encountered, which is a bit of a disappointment after so many years. But we managed to spin out a lot of good ideas from the company, and even we built out teams internally before we shut down, and those teams were able to build their own companies. So
And exactly this, I think, is very impressive. We have to learn how to use the opportunities we have, the learnings. We need to understand that when we do something, failing is not necessarily a problem. The problem is more so, or the opportunity is more so, how we use the learnings and how we move forward with it. And in this example, Sascha was just mentioning that you actually created more from it afterwards.
Yes, absolutely. It was exciting that we were able to build two separate companies out of just things that we developed at Novome. So the people who figured out our genetic engineering techniques, some of our top scientists, turned that into their own company called Clutch Biotechnologies. So now they help scientists all around the Bay Area who are developing various cures to make the DNA that they need faster and more efficient. And they're already very successful. And then of course there's Tabulous, which I mentioned, where we took some of the software that we built internally, we reworked it so that everyone can use it, and added in AI to make it more, essentially more accessible and efficient.
So it sounds like that you go even further with your ideas to inspire other teams to move forward, to create new things, which I think is very noble approach.
Yeah.
To make sure that not just we succeed, but the people around us succeed, the teams we create. How do you go about creating teams?
Oh, I mean, so for us, it was absolutely thrilling to see Jake and Kathy, who started Clutch Biotechnologies, to see them really succeed. Essentially to go from being an employee to a startup founder, to kind of take on this additional leadership burden. I mean, they were guiding people in their day-to-day work, teams, but to become a startup founder is an entirely expanded level of difficulty. But they were already good people when they started, and I think I think you're right that thinking about how you build your teams and who you bring in, and kind of like identifying who you can count on, because delegation is so crucial to being able to get things done. I think that is it's absolutely crucial to be building your teams from people you can absolutely trust to get something done. Not exactly the way you would have expected them to do it, but in a way that ultimately you are happy with.
To encourage the people to work with their own skills.
Absolutely.
To get effective and efficient work back from them, whether it is exactly what we anticipated or even better.
Yeah.
And to help them grow throughout their journey. So how do you find these people?
Well, it was quite a challenge. We hired very slowly because of it. We had to search high and low for these people. A lot of them came from references of current employees. We recruited, since we were based in the Bay Area, we recruited from the local universities, Stanford and Berkeley, but also community colleges. Yeah, what was crucial though was a combination of reference checks and practical expertise. Understanding how people work when they're given a real problem to kind of think about, and how they kind of interact with us. So it was just as important that they get something right as that they communicate when they didn't understand something or when they got something wrong. I mean, this is kind of the core part of trust. Is the absolute worst thing that you can have is someone who does something that's not kind of what you were hoping for, and then they never communicate to you that they're having trouble with it, or that when you communicate that it's not what you needed, that you can't somehow like improve the quality.
And I think that might be even more important in bioengineering or in research-based products than it is in normal companies, because your product is completely dependent on the research, on the data, and the analysis. So if people cannot follow the process, if they don't understand it, they don't bring the right data back, and also don't know how to interpret it, and can share it, it makes it very difficult to grow what you want to grow.
Absolutely. The most difficult thing about bioengineering is that it takes so long between when you start a particular segment of a project and when you find the results. You can find out maybe a week, 2 weeks later if all of the work that you did in the preceding 2 weeks was actually worth anything, or if you had made a minor mistake anywhere in that process. and have to start over. And that proves to be a bit of a challenge. So,
And these steps you have over and over again.
yes.
So it's not just like over a course of several years.
Mhm.
You have to trial and error to
Absolutely.
research, to see. And you cannot bring the product easily to your customers because it's not ready at this point. Whereas when you have a different kind of company, it might be easier to test the product on your customers to see how it resonates, to get feedback directly. But in this case, where do you get the feedback from?
So for us, as the scientific leadership of the company, we were the ones responsible for figuring out what the feedback looked like. And for most of the life of the company, that was it. We were the ones determining what science was good enough. And so we had to meet develop our own expectations and then meet them. And those expectations had to be high because you want to minimize any avoidable causes of failure in the clinical trials because they're so expensive. So when you go into clinical trials, of course, the judge of whether you succeed or fail becomes external forces. You simply contract another party to help you collect the data, and then that data is then reported to the FDA. So they're ultimately the final deciders.
Very interesting. So in bioengineering, it sounds to be more complicated than actually in many other businesses, since you need to really communicate your goals very clearly.
Yes.
You need to make sure that everybody understands where you want to go. And you mentioned before that you work a lot with different vendors, third parties to get stuff done. Can you tell me more about that?
That's right. So especially when you're running a startup, it's impossible to do everything in-house. And when you're running a biotech startup, you have external vendors, not just for goods such as like chemicals that you might use, but mainly for services where a lot of the spend shows up. So we're talking about genetic sequencing perhaps, or clinical trials are a vendor-based thing. You don't do the clinical trial in-house, you pay someone else to do it. And these services are usually very expensive, but also the most expensive part of it as a startup is the time, because most startups are always running out of time. There's too much to do, and if you have a specific amount of funding or runway, every week counts.
And it sounds even more crucial because when you do bioengineering, if I understand you correctly, and something isn't communicated correctly, it's not just going one step back, it's actually going weeks back, having to redo it. So the time which you lose and the dependency on the other processes which are waiting for the result is very draining and financially costly.
Absolutely. So yeah, mistakes can be devastating for a company. We certainly had a few mistakes, but I think one of the things that we used very effectively to avoid having mistakes be the sort of thing that ends the startup was that we were always ready to communicate very frequently, asking open-ended questions so that we understood the situation on the ground at the vendor, as well as building a model of it internally for our own understanding. So it's kind of crucial to use not only empathy, but also just all of your abilities to really both understand where your vendor or whoever you're communicating with is coming from, and also to get across how you see things as well, so that everyone's well aligned. That's one of the biggest issues, because a miscommunication, again, can be absolutely just hundreds of thousands of dollars up in smoke. It's quite a lot. But we were able to just, through constant communication and of course also just switching vendors, that's something that is a little easier than managing employees, is that when it's an external vendor, you don't feel quite so bad about switching. So we really had to just make sure that everyone were at the top of their game because of just the sheer difficulty of what we were trying to do.
So clear communication, ensuring that the standards are set correctly so that everybody knows where to go, what to deliver, and when to deliver it, to constantly be in contact, to show empathy if something is not going in the right direction, and to redirect the approach if something might not look the way you're anticipating. And that's something we have to do with all kinds of adventures, startup companies, product launches, new things we're doing. While it might be even more important or crucial in a bioengineering company because of the pure nature of the product, we all know that miscommunication, goals we have not set correctly, maybe mission statements that are not approachable to everybody or not understood by everybody can be very devastating and cost a lot of time. How did you make sure to source the right people in the first place?
One of the key traits we looked for in people, both vendors that we were working with and in employees that we were trying to hire, was actually good communication. I think that good communication is only achievable if you have a clear mental model of the information you want to transmit. A good communicator not only has a sort of clarity of thought internally before they can even speak that, transmit that clarity to you, but also a good communicator starts to learn your language as well. Because even though, we're both speaking English right now, we might have different terms or different things that we think are important to communicate. And to be speaking the same language is also to have a shared understanding of what is important, what's worth mentioning. So for instance, if someone the product that we were working on actually is sensitive to air. The oxygen in the air will, depending on how you expose it to air, could inactivate it. So we had to make sure that with some vendors, the specific gases that they were using to kind of exclude the air from the process were the proper mix, because if you use too much of one gas, it can acidify it versus another gas. Something that's easy to overlook is if you just assume everyone uses the same mix of gases, you would not know to ask about this. So establishing kind of the same language as we had established that if you use too much of one gas, it acidifies things and can damage the product. And we realized that we couldn't assume that everyone was going to do it the same way we did. And so that was one thing that just by asking open-ended questions and asking as many questions as possible so that we could understand as clearly as possible what it's like to actually be there at the vendor, we were able to kind of understand what was important to ask about.
And I think it's a very crucial point, not assuming, but understanding, clarifying, ensuring that everybody's on the same page. And if you have doubts, instead of just letting people do, ask them, learn, see where they're coming from, see what they do, why they do certain things. Maybe learn something new, even adjust your processes if necessary. And make sure, like you said, to speak the same language, even when you might speak the same language verbally, but to ensure you're on the same page overall, to go the same direction, have the same goals.
Absolutely. And one thing is, people will help you with this, at least in my experience, is that sometimes they'll leave breadcrumbs in their language that if you're paying close attention and you're willing to ask about it, they, like in the question of this gas that we use to exclude the air, they might say something about them having to attach a particular canister. And you think, oh, well, that's kind of strange. Like, why, if you have the confidence to ask the question that you think you might need to ask, if you're not willing to just assume that it's all right, it might be a little uncomfortable for everyone, but it's how you get to the truth. So if you hear something that just sounds a little bit off, that they've left you a breadcrumb perhaps, so that you can find your way to the correct answer. It's not an accusation by any means. It's merely establishing understanding. But yeah, it is crucial. They're just little clues, and you have to be willing to ask.
So Sascha, you just mentioned active listening actually, and listening to the breadcrumbs which people share in their communication to really understand what they're talking about and to ask deep questions to make sure that you're on the same page.
Absolutely. Some of the best people I've worked with are also the most efficient communicators, both efficient and effective. And it comes from not only clarity of mind. You assemble a model in your mind and you think about it deeply before trying to communicate. Then you try to build that model in someone else's mind when you communicate. But also, they were unafraid to ask questions. And that's really crucial. A lot of people feel like they should remain silent when they hear something that doesn't quite match what they have in their head, their mental model of what's really happening. So the breadcrumbs that you might see are someone's explaining to you what they did when they were fulfilling a task that you asked them to do. And they might say something that just feels a little bit out of place. Maybe, they might have mentioned using a tool that you didn't think they needed. And it's not something where you're trying to accuse them of anything by any means, but you're trying to establish that the model in your head is a correct model of what happened. And so if you hear one of these breadcrumbs in speech, and you can just, by asking about it, by explaining how you understand something, and then asking about things that don't match with what you heard, you can actually fix your model and figure out what really happened in the real world.
And I think it's a very important subject, what you just said. It's not about accusing people. It's about learning together.
Absolutely.
To understand what mental model they have in mind. Is it maybe more productive than what I do already? Is there anything else I can learn to make my product more effective, to work more efficiently? So it's not a model where when we ask questions, try to tell people you are wrong. It's more so a combined learning experience to get to a better point together.
Absolutely. You're trying to find the truth together. The truth of not just like what is happening and what has happened, but also what needs to be done. And so in communication, you're establishing in someone else their understanding of what's important to you. So if it's important that you lock the door when you leave the house, for instance, and someone else, meanwhile, has lived in a neighborhood where you never needed to do that, establishing that kind of understanding is just one of the kind of simplest ways, where it's just by asking the right questions, you can just arrive at a place where everyone works well together.
And it's very important to work well together, like we said before, to establish a goal where you work towards together, and to make sure that whatever you work on together is successful.
Mm-hmm.
Sascha, is there anything you want to share before we end this podcast today?
Well, I mean, it's been great talking to you. I really hope that more people actually benefit from your teaching, because I think that if the world is full of better communicators, I think we could solve a lot of problems.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Appreciate you too.